Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to the highly anticipated Personal Data Protection Summit, kicking off what will be an exciting week of events as industry leaders and global experts takes us through thought-provoking panels, hands-on workshop, and actionable insights designed to help you future-proof data strategies and drive responsible innovation. My name is Harjit, and it's always a privilege and honor to be your MC. Starting off PDP Week, today's summit will hear two distinguished panels of industry experts as they share on latest regulatory development, best practices, and actionable strategies designed specifically for data protection professionals. May we now please invite our guest of honor, Mrs. Josephine Teo, Minister for Digital Development and Information and Minister in charge of Cybersecurity and Smart Nation Group, to deliver the opening remarks for PDP Summit 2025. Minister, please.
Good morning, colleagues and friends. I'd first like to thank everyone for being here. We have around 1,500 people in the room today, and over 2,000 coming and going throughout the week, including from many countries in Asia and even further afield. I would like to especially appreciate our international guests for joining us, including the data protection authorities from fellow ASEAN member states. Thank you all for being here. The theme for this year is data protection in a changing world. This is an acknowledgement of the significant changes in both our global operating environment as well as in the world of technology. These twin forces have disrupted our workplaces, our homes, and our relationships with each other. It is inevitable that we must adjust our practices, laws, and even our broader social norms. Most of you in this room are practitioners of data and AI, or both. Last year, I had spoken about the importance of data in the age of AI. This remains as pertinent as ever. We all know that generative AI models are built on vast amounts of data, and data is critical throughout the AI development cycle, from pre-training to fine-tuning to testing and validation, the entire life cycle. In recent times, we have seen an explosion of sector-specific AI applications built on customized or proprietary datasets. A good example is Ask Max, Changi Airport's chatbot that helps to address passenger queries. It runs on an LLM designed to call on Changi Airport's data repositories. Another example is GPT Legal, which was fine-tuned by IMDA using the Singapore Academy of Law's LawNet database. Given the criticality of data in the AI age, it should not be surprising that data has also become a limiting factor to continuing advancement. Let us walk through the data challenges at each stage of AI development and use. I will start with challenges in AI model training. In model training, the first well-known issue is the use of internet data to train these large models. Internet data is very uneven in quality. Often, they contain biased or toxic content from different sources, including user-generated content on discussion forums. When the underlying data input contains harmful, toxic, or biased content, this can lead to downstream problems with model outputs. In the first regional red teaming challenge run jointly by Singapore IMDA and 8 other countries, problematic model behaviors were observed. When asked to write a script about Singaporean inmates, the large language model chose names such as Kok Wei for a character who was jailed for illegal gambling, Siva for disorderly drunk, and Razif for a drug abuse offender. These stereotypes, most likely picked up from the training data, are actually things that we want to avoid. At the same time, developers are running out of internet data. Most of the LLMs are already trained on the entire corpus of internet data. What then should model providers do to improve their models? They are turning to more sensitive and private databases to augment their models, which brings its own set of challenges. OpenAI, for example, has a growing list of data-related partnerships, not only with global news outlets, but also governments, companies, and universities, like the Icelandic government, Apple, Sanofi, and Arizona State University. The partnership model is one way of increasing data availability, but it is time-consuming and difficult to scale. Some of these databases may include sensitive data, such as personal data or business confidential information. Increasingly, we need a way to train models whilst protecting sensitive information. Let me deal with the challenges in AI application development. AI application, or app, which can be seen as the skin that is layered on top of AI models, can also pose reliability concerns. If apps provide inaccurate, biased, or toxic information, or leak confidential information, these can have serious implications for the company's reputation, and in the worst cases, may actually cause physical harm. Typically, companies would employ a range of well-known guardrails to make their app reliable. These include writing detailed system prompts to steer the model behavior using retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, which many of you are familiar with, to improve accuracy, or different types of filters to sieve out sensitive information. Even then, apps can have unexpected shortcomings. Vulkan, a third-party tester, recently tested a high-tech manufacturer's chatbot that assists employees to answer questions on product specifications that are posed by the prospective customers. The manufacturer was rightly concerned that the app would inadvertently leak confidential business information, tell the prospective customers something that they don't want the prospective customers to know. True enough, Vulkan found that when prompted in Mandarin, the app leaked back-end sales commission rates. You can imagine, from the high-tech manufacturer's point of view, well, telling the customer what the sales commission rates is basically revealing how much further they can cut the price. That is not something any business wants. Fortunately, this problem was discovered during the testing phase. This highlights the value of independent testing. To ensure the reliability of Gen AI apps before release, it is important to have a systematic and consistent way to check that the app is functioning as intended, and there is some baseline safety. Like model developers, app developers must deal with data inadequacies. Very often, the models are linked up with internal company databases so that the apps can cater to the business's specific needs. However, there are often insufficient proprietary data to build reliable apps. 42% of respondents to an IBM Global survey cited this as one of their biggest challenges to AI adoption. So we need a way to unlock more data sharing amongst companies while protecting sensitive information. After AI apps are deployed and used by consumers, correcting erroneous or harmful information poses a significant challenge. The process of fine-tuning and retraining a model after it has learned something is imprecise and often costly. Machine unlearning has therefore become a new field, albeit a nascent one. A key challenge faced by LLM leaders like Anthropic is that models now have billions or trillions of parameters. Which variables contribute most to the shortcomings in output? Are there techniques to identify them and carry out targeted model corrections at scale? Because you won't just find one, you'll find many. Finally, an overriding concern is accountability. The AI lifecycle is complex with model builders, deployers, users, and more. Each has a role to play to mitigate the risks. This community here would be familiar with the case of a Samsung or group of Samsung employees who unintentionally leaked sensitive information by pasting confidential source code into ChatGPT to check for errors. I think we are all slightly aware, if not very aware, that this is happening in our workplaces too. Our colleagues, in order to sometimes just do spell check, sometimes just to check the way in which they have put across ideas, paste a whole file onto ChatGPT in order to get a response. And you really wonder, is there something in that file that should not be told to ChatGPT? Is it the responsibility of the employees who should not have put sensitive information into the chatbot? I think most of us would think, yes, they have at least some responsibility. But is it also the responsibility of the app provider to ensure that they have sufficient guardrails to prevent sensitive data from being collected? Or should model developers be responsible for ensuring that such data is not used for further training? There are no easy answers to this, I'm afraid. So let me pivot to how we can solve for data-related challenges so as to unlock the potential of data for AI. For AI to continue advancing, we will need various types of solutions, from organizational process improvements to developing new techniques in risk mitigation. Technical solutions such as privacy-enhancing technologies, or PETs, that optimize the use of data without compromising privacy, have emerged as a viable pathway for addressing these concerns. In the last 3 years, the IMDA and PDPC have run the PET sandbox to encourage businesses to explore and experiment with the use of PETs across a variety of sectors and use cases. We have seen growing interest, and some early adopters have also experienced tangible business returns. For instance, Ant International, a financial institution that joined the sandbox, used a combination of different PETs to train an AI model with their digital wallet partner without disclosing customer information to each other. The intention was to use the model to match the vouchers that are offered by the wallet partner with the customers of Ant who were the most likely to use them. Ant International contributed voucher redemption data of their customers, while the digital wallet company contributed purchase history, preference, and demographic data of the same customers. The AI model was trained separately with both datasets. without each data owner seeing or ingesting each other's data. This led to a vast improvement in the number of vouchers claimed. The wallet partner increased its revenues, while Ant International enhanced its customer engagement. You can see that this way of using privacy-enhancing technologies has many use cases. For example, in detecting fraud. For example, in allowing healthcare authorities, institutions to do a better job of taking care of their patients. Synthetic data is another example of a PET that shows good promise. Last year, I launched PDPC's Guide on Synthetic Data Generation, which sets out best practices for organizations. There are now innovative companies in Singapore, such as one known as Better Data, that help AI developers generate data to mimic real-world datasets. These synthetic data can further augment existing datasets as training datasets to build AI models, which goes some way to addressing the data challenges I had referred to earlier. Our experience with organizations in the sandbox has allowed us to better understand the technologies, their ability to protect personal data, and comply with legal obligations when such data is shared. It has also given us a good sense of the growing interest from technology providers in offering PET solutions, as well as companies who are keen to use the PETs. To build on this momentum, IMDA will be introducing a PET adoption guide designed for C-suite executives. This guide will offer resources to help organizations identify the right PETs for their business needs and will also include key considerations for companies to effectively deploy the PETs. In other words, it is a guide that will help you do a better job of convincing your key stakeholders. This year's Personal Data Protection Week will once again include the PET Summit. Similar to last year when it was held for the first time, the summit will be a good opportunity for data protection authorities, existing and interested PET solution providers and users in the sandbox to connect and learn more from one another. Let me now turn to talking about how we create a safe environment to trial responsible AI applications. As demonstrated in the PET sandbox, Singapore's approach towards emerging technologies is to help provide tools, resources, and a safe environment for companies to experiment and to quickly share the learning so that industries and consumers can benefit. Recently, IMDA, the AI Verify Foundation, and industry partners collaborated on a global AI assurance pilot, studying ways to test the reliability of generative AI applications. Testing is a critical step to demonstrate that the AI application has addressed key risks. A lot of the things that we use on a day-to-day basis, the appliances in our homes, the vehicles that took us to the workplace, we would not use them if they had not been properly tested. And yet on a day-to-day basis, AI applications are being used on us without actually having been properly tested. So this is actually a lacuna, a serious gap that needs to be filled. One example of how we're doing this is Changi General Hospital, which worked with third-party tester SoftServe to test the reliability of their summarization tool for selected medical reports, because it is incredibly helpful to doctors who have so much workload to be able to put together case or patient summaries that can be shared with other physicians. But how to make sure that this summarization tool is reliable, accurate, doesn't misrepresent the patient, this is of utmost importance. You and I may possibly be one of those patients, and we do not want our health situation to be misrepresented. Another is NCS, which tested how well its coding assistant adhered to internal coding standards and security requirements, as well as external regulatory guidelines. With insights from this pilot, IMDA has identified several testing methods that organizations can use to test for and manage the risks. This compilation of testing methods is known simply as the IMDA Starter Kit. It is a direct response to companies' requests to go beyond governance frameworks and guidelines for more standardized ways to test and deploy AI applications. It includes testing for risks like undesirable content and unintended data disclosure, like those that I described earlier. The learning and iterating continue as IMDA transitions its pilot to a new, ongoing AI assurance sandbox. The sandbox is a learning environment to help all of us, whether we are business users, government teams, governance teams, AI developers, to jointly develop solutions like better guardrails or processes for Gen AI applications. Organizations interested in putting in their applications to the test and contributing to our shared knowledge base are very welcome to join. Ultimately, our aim with each of these sandboxes is to find coalition and consensus around what good looks like, whether for data protection or AI governance. What does good look like? Much like the traditional fields of product safety or pharmaceuticals, we need subject matter experts to agree on the standards to uphold and testers to assure us that the standards are actually being met. Given the speed and scale of AI adoption, there is some urgency for standards to be developed and agreed to. But realistically, this will take time. There are many stages to go through. In Singapore, at least, we have taken the critical first steps to grow the ecosystem for testing and assurance. Our hope is that industry players will join us to initiate soft standards that can be the basis for the eventual establishment of formal standards. The field of data protection has had a head start, and I'm pleased to share that we are ready to take the next step. IMDA has worked with Enterprise Singapore and the Singapore Accreditation Council to elevate the data protection trust mark to a new Singapore standard, Singapore Standard 714. I think for all Singaporeans, it's like you would like it to be 4 numbers, but there's only 3. You can add a 0 in front, for this weekend, whatever else you might like to do with 4 numbers. 714, remember. Companies that demonstrate accountable data protection practices can now apply to be certified under this new standard, which will set the national benchmark for companies that want to demonstrate data protection excellence. The trust mark will assure consumers that certified organizations adopt world-class practices in protecting their personal data. So let me conclude. I hope that I have given you a sense of Singapore's approach to dealing with the challenges and opportunities in using data for AI advancement. We believe that there is much for businesses and people to gain when AI is developed responsibly and deployed reliably, including the methods for unlocking data. It is up to us as leaders in corporations, in government, to understand how we can do so and to put in place the right measures. And by doing so, not only will we facilitate AI adoption, we will also inspire greater confidence in data and AI governance. And on that note, I wish you all fruitful discussions in the days ahead. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking the Minister for gracing our event today. Thank you very much, Minister. Our first panel discussion will be on From Policy to Practice, Translating AI Use for Businesses. In this session, you'll be hearing from industry experts who will share their perspectives on how businesses can translate policies into practice, real-world actions that matter. They'll also be shining a light on the critical role that data protection officers, or DPOs play in helping organizations find that balance between innovation and accountability. Expect valuable insights, real-world examples, and practical tips on the responsible deployment of Gen AI tools, to support safe strategic growth. This also includes how companies can ensure their use of AI is privacy conscious, safe, and is aligned with long-term strategic goals, all while navigating an increasingly complex regulatory environment. It gives me great pleasure now to invite our stellar panelists to join us on stage to take their seats. We start first with Mr. Yong Zi Kin, Chief Executive, Singapore Academy of Law. Good morning, sir. Dr. Charlene Liu, Director of Innovations Radiology, Singapore Health Services. Good morning, Dr. Liu. Dr. Geraldine Wong, Chief Data Officer, GXS Bank. Good morning, Dr. Wong. And moderating this session will be Mr. Shamik Kundu, Executive Director, AI Verify Foundation. Shamik is a senior data and AI professional with over 25 years of experience across AI safety and testing, financial services, and consulting. Before joining AI Verify, Shamik helped build and scale AI testing software business at Silicon Valley startup True Era and served on multiple consultative forums on AI governance, including those of Bank of England, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, and the OECD and Global Partnership of AI. Good morning, Shamik, and it's always a pleasure to see you. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, QR code will be flashed on the screen periodically. Do send in your questions. Join me in giving the panel a big, warm welcome, please. Shamik, it's all yours, sir.
Thank you. Good morning. I can see the hall is filled and we're right up to the back. Let me just start off by taking a very quick poll. How many of you have data protection as part of your day job? Raise your hands, please. Quite a significant share, I was told very scientifically. It's about 60% of the room. I'm now going to tell you, just preparing for this meeting, I was talking to a friend of mine who has a role in data protection. For my sins, I gave him that role many years ago, 6, 7 years ago. And I said, how does it feel? He's at the intersection of data protection and AI. He came back to me saying, have you watched Everything Everywhere All at Once? Yeah? I don't know how many of you watched it. He said, I feel like Michelle Yeoh in that movie. It's happening all at the same time, and I often do not know which world I'm sitting in. So that's the world I suspect many of you find yourself in, moving at a very fast pace, coming at you. And what we aim to do in the next 44 minutes is to give you a whirlwind tour of the opportunities, the challenges, and the role that you can play personally in making safe, responsible AI with good data use practices a possibility. So today I have a wonderful panel. I'm not going to try and introduce them in detail. I'm going to let them do that. But very briefly, we have Yong Zi Kin, Chief Executive of Singapore Academy of Law, Dr. Charlene Liu, Director of Innovation for Radiology at Singapore Health Services, and also Senior Doctor at Changi General Hospital, and Dr. Geraldine Wong, Chief Data Officer at GXS Bank. So we'll start off today, maybe Zikin, starting with you. Each of you, perhaps you can give a slightly longer introduction to yourself, your work in this space at the intersection of data and AI, and perhaps get things going with a little bit on the use of AI, particularly Gen AI. That's where a lot of the interest will be in your industry, in your organization, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, thanks, Shamik, and I'm glad to be back here again. I like your introduction that data protection officers at the intersection of data protection and AI is like Michelle Yeoh in Everything Everywhere All at Once, because you're going to be superstars and going to win Oscars, every one of you. Well, I'm Zi Kin, Chief Executive at the Singapore Academy of Law. The Academy of Law is an institution, right, that looks after training of lawyers, It looks after the developments of legal systems and also the promotion of the use of legal tech tools by the legal profession. So we go very deep into the legal profession. And well, we do several other things as well, but these are the three relevant ones for our discussion today. And because of the role that the Academy of Law plays, it actually gives me a front row seat, right, at some of the biggest changes that's actually happening in the legal industry. Generative AI, I believe, is the right kind of AI for the legal sector. And I can see the interest and adoption of tools that are enhanced by generative AI by a lot of lawyers. There's a lot of interest, and beyond interest, there's a lot of experimentation and a lot of attempts to adopt. But it raises a few issues that we are actively looking at. Number one, going beyond just teaching lawyers how to craft prompts, because crafting prompts to lawyers is the modern day equivalent of crafting keyword searches, right? Going beyond crafting prompts, right, and identifying the correct legal tech tool to use and adopt, there are deeper issues. Deeper issues like, for example, how does this affect the training of lawyers? Because a lot of the basic legal tasks, Gen AI can simplify and do it much more quickly. This has an impact on how we train young lawyers, and that's a very important area that we have started work on, and we are working with Institute of Adult Learning in Singapore to think about how to move, right, and develop new pedagogy for that. The others, of course, is how AI is going to affect the dynamics, right, of the solicitor and client's relationship. And I will come back to that later on when we talk about the role of client confidentiality, concerns around client confidentiality and personal data in that dynamic, and how that drives the selection of the right kind of enterprise tools. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what's keeping me busy. And I'll probably just end off my very short introduction by saying that the Academy of Law also provides a legal research tool for all lawyers to use. 75% of lawyers in Singapore use that tool, and it is in that capacity we are able to also get our hands dirty in introducing generative AI. You heard mention of GPT legal earlier in the minister's speech, and I'd be happy to talk a bit about the experience that we've garnered venturing into this area.
Thank you so much, Deacon. From law to health. Over to you, Dr. Charlene.
Thank you. Thank you, Shamik, for inviting me here, and very good morning to everyone. So what we're trying to do in healthcare, in the public healthcare sector, is we're aiming for transformation. So we're looking at transformation of healthcare services with the use of AI. So when we're looking at transformation of healthcare, we need to look at it from the point of view of training our workforce. So AI literacy is really a big part of what we're trying to do now. We're trying to get everyone trained, at least to a certain standard. So in our hospital currently, we have an aim of 100% AI literacy rate amongst all of our staff. So that's the first step. Secondly, we are actually looking at concrete endpoints. So we're talking about clinical outcomes. We're looking at service delivery outcomes. Now, this is very important for us in healthcare. Especially when you look at the numbers. So I'm a big fan of mathematics. So if you examine the numbers, over the years, the year-on-year growth of, let's say, imaging volume data is growing at a geometric rate. So we're actually hitting an exponential curve. So about 20 years ago, we would be year-on-year growing in terms of the volumes of our studies, perhaps 2 to 3% per year. Currently, we're looking at 5%, and we're projected to increase to about 7% year on year. On the other hand, the growth of our workforce is a linear graph, and we're growing at about 2% per annum. So as you can see, the curves are actually diverging. So at some point, we are going to have to very seriously look at how we can actually address this challenge. And it affects every one of us, our families. So we're looking at this challenge very seriously. And finally, and this is the part which is very relevant to today's panel, is how do we actually verify and how do we test the safety and security of using all of these AI tools? And how do we do that long term? So we're not just looking at snapshots, and most of us, when we present to the hospitals, we are there for multiple visits, and we follow up our patients over the duration of their entire lifetime. So how do we monitor AI long term? That's the next thing, the next challenge that we are facing. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're trying to do. So I guess we've set quite a large chunk of AI transformation that we have to look at seriously. And we also naturally have to set a very high bar for ourselves in healthcare.
Thank you very much. From law and health to the last high-risk, high-stakes sector, finance. Over to you, Dr. Josephine.
Yeah, hi, I'm Geraldine. I'm really glad to be here, and thanks, Shamik, for the introduction as well. For those foreigners who aren't familiar with GXS Bank, we are one of the 4 digital banks that was fully given license to 4 years ago. It's made out of a consortium of Grab, which is the ride-hailing company, and Singtel, a telco information company here in Singapore. My job actually looks after really the full ends of the spectrum, from the whole data lifecycle and AI lifecycle upstream, collecting the data, ensuring the data governance. The quality is good, and it's how it's being used within the AI models. And what is the AI governance around the output of the data? How do we use that data? So I can't go back to my stakeholders and say, hey, that data quality isn't the best, because it's all up to me to ensure that happens. Within the organization, within the bank, we've been exploring AI since the start of the inception of the bank, from traditional AI to now generative AI in the last 2.5 years. There are use cases, both internal as well as external customer facing. And a lot of the panelists have alluded to the guardrails around how we protect the data as well, which we'll probably go into after as well. But just a really brief introduction. A lot of the internal use cases have been focused on productivity use cases, as well as how do we ensure financial crime, fraud cases are being detected and monitored in a very real-time manner as well. For the external customer facing, we have looked at launching a FAQ chatbot. It's now live. If you're a GXS Bank customer, you can log into your app and you are able to interact with the app or on our website as well. This has actually brought down our live agent volumes by about 20% to be routed to our chatbots as well. And there will be more phases that we are looking to include, more features. And that's when we talk about how data protection is so important when we touch upon transaction data or personal data when it comes to our customers as well.
Thank you very much. So that hopefully gives you, and we wanted to kick this off because this is about adoption of AI. It's not only about the risk. So we wanted to kick off with that overview of where that opportunity space lies. Maybe now we get into the meat of like this conference itself overall. As we think about these use cases, and we can have each of you opine on this next question, what are some of the biggest data-related challenges that you see in adoption of generative AI in particular? No particular order, maybe Zeke, you can start first.
Well, I think that maybe I'll speak a bit from the perspective of how we've looked at it. Because in the legal sector, right, if you are a law practice, actually your crown jewels are your knowledge management system, the precedents that you have, right, the quality of that. And many of the largest law firms have invested years and lots of resources into making sure that they are good quality KM systems and they're able to retrieve information well. What Gen AI promises for the legal sector is the ability to unlock that in a much more efficient way than before. Previously, you were limited to searches, and then there was a lot of work that still had to be done in analyzing. But with AI, right, for the legal sector, the key thing that's spreading out is actually summarization. It helps in a very useful and important step in legal research and analysis. But we are also seeing tools, for example, tools that can help you generate contracts. And if these tools work and integrate with a good repository of high-quality contractual precedents, you're able to generate pretty good templates. And this is stuff that we see happening, right? And lots of lawyers are very interested in that. Now, from the Academy of Law's perspective, we've been running a legal research database for, well, 20 over years. It brings together cases that have come from the courts. It brings together textbooks that have been authored and published by Academy Publishing. I think we are close to more than 50 titles now, legal journals, right? Commentaries and all that. There's a lot of information there. And one of the things that we discovered is this, right? No matter how sexy generative AI is, right, and no matter whatever promise, right, the purveyors of the solutions tell you, you can't run away from one important thing, right? Good old-fashioned information management, right? If your data isn't well labeled, if your data quality isn't good, right, you're not going to be able to maximize the output of the investment that you put, right, for Gen AI. And thankfully, right, because we are a publishing house and an academic institute, we invested 20 over years, right, in building up that semantic layer. And that helps us to do things like knowledge graph, right? In a few months' time, I'm excited to see whether we can introduce new features in our legal research tool, going beyond just summarization into areas like question and answer for legal questions, right? For legal topics and annotation of statutes, right? To help lawyers when they conduct legal research. But the one thing that I think that our experience has taught us is that investments in curating and labeling and ensuring the quality of your data is absolutely important. No shortcuts. Some of these AI tools can help you catch up quickly, right? But you really need to invest in the quality of your data.
And maybe I'll call out one important point because many of you are data professionals, but I do want to distinguish between data quality, which of course is important, but curating and information management, which I think is something that is new for unstructured data with Gen AI. Because if you don't know which document has what information and which one should be accessible to whom, for what purposes, etc., then it becomes much more risky when you've rolled out new technology. Maybe, Dr. Charlene, what would you see as maybe one big challenge from a data perspective as you think of the AI journey?
Thanks, Shamik. So from my perspective, I think the biggest challenge is we are trying to hit a moving target. So for healthcare, I was pleasantly surprised to discover that the infrastructure that we have for data protection in healthcare is actually extremely robust and very secure. But as I said, we are actually in a moment of flux where we have a huge volume of data that's growing year on year. So how do we actually protect all of that data? Do we archive all data? We certainly do keep medical records for X number of years after demise of patients. So we actually have a growing database. So we are always trying to keep on top of managing our data and managing our information systems. The next challenge we have is that we're the favorite target of cyber criminals. I'm not quite sure why, but I believe it has something to do with the value of healthcare data, which is very expensive, very high value. So we are a big target for cyber criminals. So there's an ever-present and clear danger for us in healthcare. So when we balance these two risks, so I look at it from a risk perspective, when we try and balance these two risks, growing data and juicy target for cybercrime, we actually need to find some sweet spot where we tailor-make our our cyber security protocols to a level which is actually cost effective. So that's the next big challenge that we have in healthcare. Because of sheer volumes, we actually have to think about how we spend our funds to protect all of that data. So it's an ever-moving target, it's in flux, and we actually have to learn how to balance risks. So I think that's the biggest challenge we have in healthcare.
So the exploding volume and dynamic nature of the attack surface, if you will, and the fact that it's a juicy target. Maybe before I come to Geraldine, and just to give you an idea both of how old I am as well as how things have evolved. In 2014, I was Chief Data Officer at one of the global banks headquartered here. And we were doing something that required us to look at data quality. It was, for those of you from banking, it was called BCBS 239, a requirement. And I remember saying, how do we do this, guys? How do we take control of certain data elements? And we agreed we would look at 500 critical data elements. To give you an idea, this is a bank of 80,000 people. And we said 500 critical data elements. You know, one critical data element could be the loan exposure that you have as a customer. Oh, wow, that's so many. This is going to explode. And then from there it became, well, but we have 20-odd systems. So 500 into 20 is already, I don't know, 10,000 data elements. That was already considered 10,000 structured data elements, mostly numbers, some text. That was considered unmanageable. And now we're talking about tens of thousands of documents, images, voice memos, and God knows what, all put to use. That is why TPOs probably feel like Michelle Yeoh in that movie. Geraldine, back to you now. How do you see the challenges with data in your AI journey?
I think the biggest challenge, at least for a regulated industry like us, is more from a model risk management perspective, where you use third-party sort of large language models. Where do those hallucination risks come about as well? Where they're being introduced? How do we test for that? How do we verify for that? And where do those guardrails play a part in some of these third-party tools that we are using as well? Which tools do we use? Which models do we use for both internal and external facing? So there must be guardrails that we have to constantly build, and the modules that has to be built in order to safeguard some of the large language models that we built for, say, a chatbot, so that it doesn't hallucinate and cause toxicity language or hallucinate with regards to a history that hasn't been made up. So I've seen recently a chatbot from one of a provider that if you ask what was the history behind Singapore and Malaysia, it completely gives you something that's very different to what it was really in history itself. So those are some of the things that you really have to check for and choose the right models. I think the second point that I want to bring up is more from a bias detection point of view. The representative of the data has to be checked against what the original data is actually alluding to. There's some biasness that might be introduced inadvertently as well. Yeah.
So model risk management, which is a banking industry specific term, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and the dependence that it has on data, and the fact that there's many more sources of bias, unfair bias coming in. Just to elaborate a little bit more, and actually there is a theme across all three answers. For those of you in finance, you'll know about this. Model risk management has been an approach that's been around for at least 20 years, maybe longer, which actually says since so much of banking in particular and insurance is basically built on financial models, mostly deterministic and some statistical prediction models. Therefore, we will control the data that goes into those models, the data, the way that model is trained on it, the outcomes it is meant to work under, strict boundary conditions in which this model can be used. And to give you an idea, each of these models in a big bank can take 6 months to check and up to a year to get approval for. Again, from there to everybody and their dog going away and buying technology or using some technology to build their own AI application. And suddenly, you're again facing a fire hose of many different models, many different applications, all using something that was meant to be like this. This explosion of data, of the use of statistically or probabilistic models is what is really driving a lot of these challenges. In the midst of all this, and then maybe just to change things up a bit, I'll start with you, Dr. Shalin, this time. In the midst of all this, what do the 60% in the room that have data protection or more broadly data governance in their job title, what do you see their role in all of this?
Well, I think the job role, the job description is evolving. In the past, we actually looked at data as being an asset, something which is very concrete, and an asset that was permanent. And nowadays, we look at data as an asset that is constantly evolving in which way we use it, in which way we link it with other data. So in healthcare, a big part of where AI, Gen AI is going is into multimodal AI. So we actually have to look at how we bring this data together. So interoperability is a key theme. So for data protection, similarly, you have to be very flexible in your vocabulary, in your knowledge base on how to deal with different types of data, how to deal with different types of information systems. So we have laboratory information systems that deal with pathology results and blood tests. We have radiology information systems that deal with images. And now we have coming online, we have genomic information systems. So what are the very specific subsets or sub-skills that you need to develop in each of these domains? So that's really for healthcare. So how do we link data? How do we deal with very, very large volumes of data? I think that in itself presents with a very different challenge for data protection, because scale actually changes the landscape, and it changes the type of mechanisms, the type of systems that you need to build and engineer in order to keep that data safe.
Thank you. Maybe I'll come to you, Geraldine, because you mentioned your role spans the whole piece. As I was listening to Dr. Shalin, I just realized, actually, we're asking a lot more from whoever has data in their title, because we're talking about, oh, you don't just have to focus on protection or cybersecurity or cross-border like compliance, but you actually, either yourself or with a partner, have to think about understanding the whole fabric of data, which, as we just discussed, is much broader now. Maybe I'll pose a slightly, I know we hadn't planned for this question, but it came out of this answer. Is it even possible for one person, one role to take care of that, or do we actually need multiple different roles coming together to address the data challenges of AI?
Well, if this one person can take over the role, it could be a unicorn, like data scientists when we first started. But anyway, coming back to your question, there are different roles in this one person and different scope that this person needs to be able to look after as well. It has to adopt a more offensive approach, if I may say. So the whole data privacy by design, they need to be really embedded. So to the room here of 60% of DPOs, please be proactive and be embedded within your organization when they actually implement the Gen AI tools, because they will have to include you at the start of implementing those solutions. Going back to the point about MRM or model risk management, they will also need to be part of that whole AI governance and model risk management to be able to understand where the risks are being included in the AI outputs as well. And of course, as third point is as external risk validator. When you take in third-party tools and use your data within those third-party tools, you need to be aware where those data protection or data challenges might be, where there might be data leakages as well. So even how your third-party risk assessment is being done has to change slightly, because you have to account for some of this potential of leakages from a large language model, or where the third-party tools might be using them as well. So with this in mind, I do encourage that there will be more essential skills that DPOs, or maybe an additional role like an AI governance expert, would need to take into account as well. Having a risk mindset, whether it's from a healthcare point of view or a very regulated industry like us, understanding where those potential risks could be injected in. And secondly, I think it's more from a technical point of view, understanding the operations or the technicalities of some of these large language models, what their potential are, what their limitations are, and where the avenues of risk may be injected as well. I think those are very key components and skill sets to upskill yourself in this year.
So another instance of or another angle of expanding the role or the broader family of roles, if it's not one role. I think you were slightly ahead of your time, because I remember in 2017 or 18, when you were still in charge of PDPC, etc., you were already thinking about the intersection with some of these AI governance piece. What would your advice be today, 7 years later, on what DPOs should be thinking about in terms of their role?
Well, I hope I don't have to make too big changes, right? Because I think going back in time, PDPC had always viewed the role of a data protection officer to be an enabler, right? And to be someone that actually helps the business. And if you look at the data protection competency framework that PDPC has out on its website, protection is a part of the skill set, but supporting innovation is also part of the skill set. So I would say that for the DPOs in the room, you have that skill set that you can now pivot, right, and to support the use of data. And that's always been an exhortation that the PDPC has given to DPOs for many, many years. So I would say that basically a few pointers to look out for, right? I think number one, I think understand the Data Protection Act and the policies around secondary use. Because security, right, is something that we all know as DPOs, right? But knowing how to control access and classify data and knowing where the data is, right, allows you to also understand that, hey, when you need to start using data you already have in new ways, secondary use, right? You know how to treat them. You know the security levels, right, and sensitivity. You are tuned for that. And if you're able to pivot that sense into unlocking access to these systems and data sets, right, you are doing a very important job to help the business side. The second one is the policies around that. All of you will be familiar with the Data Protection Act, and embedded in the Data Protection Act are very important provisions that help with secondary use. For example, research exception to consent. For example, legitimate interest to and something very, very unique to Singapore that we can really benefit from, the exception that allows you to use data for business improvements. So these things are there already. So as data protection officers, you're very familiar with these things. So combining your familiarity with how data is kept, right, secure and control its access with the policies that are in place, you can do a absolutely crucial job in helping to unlock the use of these data that is already sitting around in your companies. I'll just end off with one last point. Many data protection officers also have a customer-facing function. You are the first face that an unhappy customers go to, right, with a litany of complaints. You have also developed that instinct, right? And I would say that my own experience has been that if you take that instinct, right, and you know the tripwires, you know the areas that customers are going to be unhappy about, take those, front load that, and help your business partners when they are designing systems. Because you are then able to suggest, to say that, there are certain types of information that you might need to provide upfront to provide greater trust and assurance so that people are prepared to use. You are better able to anticipate some of these issues that customers might be unhappy with, and you're able then to integrate that into the design of their user interface and the user experience. So I say that data protection officers, you actually have all the experience, right? And it's a question of just taking that, pivoting, and understanding your role, at least in Singapore, has never been just purely protection, but protection to enable innovation.
Thank you so much, Zeke. I'm conscious we've got a lot of questions with lots of votes on them, so I'm going to take the next 12 odd minutes into the questions. Use that for the questions. But before that, I just want to kind of reflect a little bit on what these three very senior, experienced practitioners have said. If you're taking away some key points, right, I think the big theme, actually there's two themes. One is a very tactical theme, which is if you're worried about job security, actually, and if you're worried about attracting talent to your teams, in the worries of, well, people will not see this as a long-term job, etc. It looks like you guys and girls as a species are here to stay. If there's one job that's going to be needed, it sounds like data protection, data governance officers are going to be needed, right? So that's a good part of the news. The bad news is that it requires a much more expanded footprint. So if you have to take away something from this conversation, I would say think of that as a strategic theme: expansion. What do I mean by that? Expansion from protection to enablement. As Zekin said, this is not new here, but it carries much more urgency now. Expanding your role to enablement is much more important today than it was when the technology was in a different stage. Expanding the gamut of data that you worry about. Shamik, circa 2014, worried about 500 critical data elements. You can't. You've got to figure out how you and those around you are able to put your arms around a much broader perimeter of data. Expanding from reacting and giving advice, this is a variant of the enabler point, but different sufficiently, to staying ahead, to being part of the conversation, not just as somebody who's asked, can I do this? Or please tell me I can do this. Please don't say no. To actually, of course I will not say no. In fact, I won't even let you ask the question. Before you ask the question, I'll come to you with, here are the scenarios, here are the guardrails that you can use to make this possible. And then the last and very important part of expansion is expanding who you work with, right? The coalition of people that you need to work with is much broader. It is the people facing off the customers. It's also the technologists. So much of the solution space, and many of the questions here about that, lies in the technology. So you've got to have a far better grasp yourself, but also that's not enough. You need to work with a much broader coalition. Data protection, data governance is finally, I say as an ex-CDO, finally everybody's job. And your job is to be at the center of that and enable everyone else to come together for that, right? With that, there's 10 minutes on the clock, and I'm going to focus that entirely on questions that people have asked. And if you haven't gone yet, please do post your questions on Pigeonhole or vote for some of the existing ones. The first question actually is indirectly related to data protection. It's actually about how did you each deal with the hallucination feature of such Gen AI tools, especially since RAG doesn't even solve it. Now, because this is not related to data protection directly, it is indirectly related. Maybe I'm going to take this question and kind of get this out of the way quickly. And also, I'll use this also to do a very short pitch for AI Verify Foundation. There are multiple ways of doing it, none of them foolproof. A lot of them do involve building technical testing tools around groundedness of the answers, around faithfulness, completeness, etc. I would strongly recommend that you get onto both the AI Verify website or join our sandbox that Minister just announced and get much deeper into this. And there's also a pilot toolkit that talks about this in depth. I'd also point, if you haven't seen it already, to some very good work from GovTech. I think it was there was a blog announced last week. It's called No or Not, and it specifically looks at how do you make sure that models are talking about the stuff that is within your context in a RAG rather than more broadly. But I'm going to move over from this particular one to the other questions, which are more of a data protection angle. And maybe I'll leave it to the panelists to decide. The first major question is, what are some practical steps we can implement for employee use of AI tools like ChatGPT for work? what are some border markers and do's and don't do's? I don't know if any of you want to take. Yeah.
Well, I can start with that. That's actually something that's very that we are looking into very actively for the legal sector. The greatest fear, I mean, one of the things that lawyers and doctors have in common, well, actually bankers as well, is client confidentiality. Right? Is banking secrecy for financial sector, confidentiality, right? Medical confidentiality for healthcare. For lawyers, it's client confidentiality privilege. So that is actually a very important consideration for data protection officers and CIOs when they are putting in place AI policies around the use of AI. One of the greatest fear, of course, is shadow AI, right? You try to ban, it will be totally unsuccessful because your youngest associates will be able to access the free version that through any browser and on the mobile phone. So the approach that we encourage is actually to put in place a clear AI policy supplemented by an early investment in the right type of AI tool. A lot of the AI tool that's available today are cloud-based, and we've tackled the question of client confidential information on cloud services already. We know how to select and use the correct enterprise levels of cloud services. The same kind of questionnaire and the same kind of analysis can also be used when you're talking about using cloud-based AI. So select the right ones to make sure that it is safe and good enough to secure your confidential information. Complement it with a clear policy that's shadow AI free and the risk of using the free versions are well known to associates. This is, to me, a very first step, right? That that we encourage all law firms to take. Beyond that, of course, there are legal sector-specific technology tools, but I think that is really more intermediate. The very basic one is really put in place a proper policy, but invest in the right enterprise level ones so that you know that there is a good tool that your associates and your colleagues have access to when they want to use it.
Dr. Shalin, there's a question directed at you, got a lot of votes. You mentioned 100% AI literacy rate for your staff, and that's attracted a lot of interest here. So they're asking what exactly is being covered and what is the baseline that all staff are expected to learn?
Sure. So we are working with AISG. They actually have developed 2 online modules, which is aimed at basic AI literacy, so understanding the fundamentals. So we call that the functional aspect of AI, how it works in a very basic, generic sense. And then we teach about bias and the risks of using AI. So we're looking at risks and how you can identify risks, because we don't want our people, our staff, to actually use AI without understanding exactly where the risks are of exposing data, for example. And also the types of Gen AI that we use, as Shamik alluded to. So we have actually whitelisted tools that we use in our public hospitals. We have NoteBuddy, for example. And we also use pair.gov.sg, which was developed by OpenGov. So we tell our people that, okay, these are the tools you have, and you know, as Zikin was alluding to, rather than just saying you cannot use this, we actually offer our staff an alternative, and we feel that that's a very much more effective approach. So that's the second part on use and AI and ethics and bias. And finally, we also teach our staff, you know, how we actually prompt the AI. So a very basic level, which we call rhetorical AI literacy. So learning how to draft or craft your prompts correctly. So at a very basic level. So at the end of these online courses, our staff are actually awarded certification, which they can then use to as a micro credential. And as I mentioned, we actually targeted this for all of our staff, executives and above. so that we know that the entire organization is AI ready, is AI literate, at least able to use and understand the risks before they step into using generative AI.
Thank you. Maybe I'll come to you, Dr. Geraldine, for the third question, because you referred to it in one of your answers to me earlier. And this is about the use of third-party vendors, right? And this is not only the model providers, just more broadly. The question is, how do we evaluate the trustworthiness, transparency, and data handling practices in that kind of further up the supply chain when you go up with third-party vendors?
Yeah, I think this is a very challenging question here because most of the third-party vendors would be traditionally quite black box in that sense. When we look at, this is still in the midst of, in the pilot stage as well, that we're trying to see both the input and the output, and then there must be some consistency as well. There must be, what you put in the input and the output has to be consistently being reproduced in every time that we do the runs as well. So if I bring it back to the chatbot that we are building, for example, we have used large language models within the FAQ chatbots. Today, it's no personal data, but at some point, there will be a personal data where we look at using transaction IDs and PIIs. However, it has gone through 600 use cases, tests, to ensure that the consistency, the tone of language that it comes out from the chatbot itself is matched what the bank's tone of voice is. It does not introduce any form of biasness or appear to be helping the customer to game the system within our products or services. And this goes through many lenses of like compliance, risk, business lens, as well as my DPO. And in that way, we actually try to mitigate as much risk from a third party, like a large language model like Claude or GPT itself.
And were you able to get some degree of transparency from your third-party vendor as well on, for example, the choices they made in creating the application, etc., unless it's just directly the model?
It's just directly the model.
Okay.
Yes, but I urge that if you do work with vendors that do a mix of a hybrid of large language models or AI solutions, then yes, those are some of the questions that you want to ask and what goes into that black box as well. What's the explainability behind it? What's the transparency behind it as well?
Yeah, and this time only slightly tongue-in-cheek. This is partly what the problem we're trying to solve with the AI Verify IMDA Assurance Sandbox. It is to bring applications, particularly those that you cannot test yourself, over to the sandbox, pair you with a testing partner who can then give you that. I'm very conscious we are at time, but there was one last question, Zeke, for you, and this is really about managing data. And the question was, how have you been using knowledge graphs? Because of the number of votes, I think we have to take that one. And how has it helped improve the tools SL is rolling out?
Well, I would say that if you want to find out, come to Tech Law Fest in September. But what I would say is that there is a tradition in academic publishing where you keep a very strong semantic layer of relationship. How which authors have worked in what publications, how cases cite each other, and which textbooks refer to others. And we do quite pinpoint citation as well. And we are now at the stage where we are able to unlock that into a knowledge graph so that it sits between your RAG, right, your repository, and the vector search that you want to put when you want to do a semantic search. So it should all come together very nicely. We've seen early, very promising results. I'm hoping that come Tech Law Fest, we will be able to at least show one of the two tools that will be making use of this.
I'm going to finish off with that appeal again to expand your horizons and become supercharged versions. If you just want inspiration, listen to a lawyer and a public servant talking about RAG, semantic search, and vector databases, all in the last 1 minute. If he can do it, if others can do it from different backgrounds, I'm sure you can all become that supercharged version of the data protection officer and all become your own Oscar Award winners. Thank you very much and thank you very much to the partner. A big hand to the panelists.
Thank you, Shamik. Thank you to our panelists. And it gives me great pleasure now to introduce our second panel discussion, Staying Ahead of Data Breaches. from cybersecurity to cyber resilience. While today data breaches are fast becoming a growing global concern, with cyber threats remaining the leading cause of data breaches in Singapore. The panel unpacks the current data breach landscape in Singapore and common cyber attack vectors, offering actionable advice for strengthening your organization's defenses. We can expect conversations around real-world use cases, practical approaches for identifying, assessing, and mitigating risk to strengthen the cybersecurity posture of your organization, and how data protection officers play a vital role in ensuring cyber resilience for their organizations. Join me as we welcome our sterling panelists on stage. We begin first with Mr. Shahan Amasha, founder and principal consultant from Pulse Fusion. Good morning, Shahan. Mr. Dave Gurbani, Chief Executive Officer, CyberSafe. Morning, Dave. Ms. Denise Wong, Deputy Commissioner, PDPC, Singapore. Hi, Denise. And Mr. Xiao Wei Long, Legal Counsel and Data Protection Officer from the Changi Airport Group. The session will be moderated by Mr. David Alfred, Director and Co-Head, Data Protection, Privacy and Cybersecurity Practice from Drew & Napier. David is a senior technology lawyer with over 25 years of experience on advising on matters relating to the digital economy, digital technology, telecommunications, and the Internet. Particular expertise in data law and policy development of data protection laws in Southeast Asia, data protection management, data breach management, and response cyber regulation and AI governance. Once again, QR code will be flashed periodically throughout the panel discussion. May we please invite you to pose your questions. Join me in giving the panel a big, warm welcome, please. And Mr. David Alfred, it's over to you, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be moderating the second panel for today. And the topic, of course, is staying ahead of data breaches. Now, personally, I find the topic of data breaches absolutely riveting, right? And I'm sure all of us do, right? To some extent, we read about it in the news, we hear about these stories, and then we wonder, why on earth did the organization do that? How could they let this happen? And then we start off, there's this voice in the back of our heads comes in. Could it happen to me? Could I be the one who clicked on that email, right? Could I be the one who accidentally forwarded something, right? So there's a little bit of thrill of hearing what happened to others, plus the anxiety for ourselves, for our organizations. Now, in this panel, right, we hope to allay some of those fears. We're going to talk a bit about some of the cyber threats and risks that are facing organizations today. We're going to talk about what organizations can do to address those risks. And of course, we're going to talk about what's the role of the DPO. As it happens, one of the hats I wear is as Data Protection Officer, so I'm a DPO as well, like many of you. And we are sort of stepping into another world, right? We heard about the AI world and the role of the DPO in that. Now it is the cyber threat, cybersecurity world, and how DPOs are involved in that as well, right? Yet another area for us to pick up skills and figure out what we can do. So with that, I'm very happy, of course, that I'm not alone on this panel. We have a really very experienced panel today. And of course, in a data breach scenario, we actually have diverse stakeholders involved. Internally, within the organization, it's not just the DPO, right? There are many teams involved, as well as externally, right? The parties you need to engage with. And this panel really brings together those voices. We can hear the internal and the external perspectives. So I'm very glad to be joined by this panel. And I'd like to first perhaps invite each of them to introduce themselves and speak a little bit about what they or their organization does in the context of data protection and data breaches. So starting first with Wei Long.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Wei Long, and I'm legal counsel and DPO at Changi Airport Group, where I lead our data protection program. Many of you would be familiar with our airport operations and immigrations business, where we also run a digital business comprising an e-commerce marketplace, iShop Changi, a rewards and loyalty program, Changi Rewards, as well as a lifestyle app, Changi app. And operating in essential services and digital platforms, I've learned that people expect things to be working all the time, don't we all? And that's why resilience is so important to me and to my organization, so that when something does actually go wrong, we're able to respond and recover effectively and smoothly. So looking forward to today's discussion.
Thanks, Velo. Now, Denise, of course, probably needs no introduction, but let's hear a little bit, and especially about data breach angle, what kind of work you're involved in.
Thanks so much, David. And good to have all of you here today. Very welcome, very thankful that we have such a large audience. As David said, I'm Denise. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Personal Data Protection Commission. And in that role, it's really a regulatory role. I think many of you hope never to meet us. But we're nice guys, actually. I have a few teams, one of which is investigations and enforcement, and that's really working with companies in a data breach scenario to understand what reasonable protections they put in place. But I also have other teams that really work with the ecosystem to try and sort of, as we rise the tide, all boats are lifted, and to really try and understand useful preventative measures in the face of the growing sort of cyber landscape that we'll talk about in just a bit. I also have another hat looking after our national sort of data policies as well as AI governance policies. And in that frame, it's really about that policy making in order to make sure Singapore remains a very sort of safe and secure space in the digital world.
Thanks, Denise. And of course, I definitely can second that. I do think of course, the entire PDPC group is very friendly, but the investigators are actually particularly friendly. It's good to get to know them, right? It's good to get to know them. Okay, Dave.
Thanks, David. Morning, everyone. I'm Dave, Group CEO of CyberSafe. We are a pure-play Singaporean cybersecurity company, and we work a lot with healthcare organizations, organizations in the aviation industry, and we've secured or assisted to secure around 250 organizations around the country with their cyber essentials, cyber trust, and compliance-based certifications, ensuring that they have a strong baseline of cybersecurity measures in their company. And beyond Singapore, we actively support regional and global adoptions of Singapore's standards, helping to uplift these baselines, primarily starting with ASEAN. So by day, that's what we do. And unfortunately for us, by night, when we do have the time to do what the techno geeks like us like to do, we help to basically do response for clients, try to uncover the issues that they have, and sometimes we hunt the bad guys too. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much. And last but not least, Shannan.
Hi, morning everyone. My name is Shannan. I'm the founder of Pulse Region. So we're an outsourced IT services company. So what Dave does, does a lot of dealing with implementing the certifications of it. For us, we get ready our clients' systems, right, for data protection. Of course, not only data protection. So we basically become the internal IT department of most of our SME clients. So we are really focused on the ground. We do a lot of groundwork with our clients, not only in data protection, in cybersecurity also. So that's what really Pulse Fusion does with SMEs. So what we see every day with data protection breaches is also the first person to know, actually. Right? The clients will actually tell us, hey, there's something wrong. And we really dive in, we look at what's happening. Not to say we do the investigations, that's Dave's job. We really be the person to report. Right? So that's where we stand. We are not outsourced DPO. We are really the IT department for clients. So we do face a lot of first incident reports with a lot of our clients. So that's where we stand. And what we can share is what we see on the ground level.
Okay, thanks very much. Now, I think, so getting to the heart of the matter, so I think many of you, if you've spoken with cybersecurity professionals or you work in the field, we've heard the term CIA, right? And no, I'm not referring to an American intelligence agency. I'm referring to the CIA of cybersecurity, right, which is confidentiality, availability, and, oh dear, I've forgotten what's I. Integrity, thank you very much, yeah, just a short test there. So CIA, we've heard these terms for a very long, it's been around for a long time, But recently, there is an R that's coming in. Okay, the acronym is spoiled, but we've added resiliency, right? And that's really the topic for today. So resiliency is something else. It's come on top, and it's been recognized that companies, it's not enough to, as if we didn't have enough to do, right? But it's not enough to protect confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We need to think about resiliency. Can our systems react, adapt, recover fast enough, right? So it's going beyond that. And of course, this is a topic that's huge. There's a lot of things we can speak about, but let's make it more concrete. I think to start things off, let's perhaps hear from Denise about what are the kinds of cyber threats organizations are facing today. Now, we do know this is always evolving, and it's really good to hear perhaps what's the most latest updated things in terms of both these kinds of threats and how, from a regulator's perspective, PDPC is trying to address this. Denise.
Thanks, David. Maybe I'll just give a sort of macro overview of some of the key trends that we've seen. 3 years, I've been in the job 3 years, and when I first came on board, there was a growing sense that the landscape was shifting a little bit, and so we decided to do sort of a detailed study into this. And what we found that indeed, data breaches have become a global concern. You see the anecdotals of sensational news headlines, but even quietly to every company, it's become a real concern. And we see two things. One is the number of breaches on a large scale have increased, and number two, the level of sophistication of the threat actors have also increased. Let me just give you some numbers, and actually this comes from our data breach landscape report for 2023 to 2024, which was also disseminated to the DPO community. And we see that actually we saw a 41% increase in large-scale data breaches reported to us within a year. And this touched almost every sector, every industry. We also found that cyber incidents remain the leading cause of these data breaches, accounting for 82% of the enforcement cases that we've had to pursue and publish. And in that, and I can go into more detail in a bit, there were a variety of controls that were missing and accountability practices that were missing in organizations that were then victims of that breach. So cyber incidents, far and away, the biggest cause for data breaches. Coming as second was human or administrative errors that can be due to files being sent to the wrong place, mishandling of physical documents. And then third trend that we saw was very much third-party vendors, external vendors that were being relied by companies getting breached, and that then affects the personal data held by the company. And if I want to just deep dive a little bit into cyber threats, ransomware actually emerged as the most prevalent type of cyber threat, and that made up 62% of the enforcement cases that we saw. To answer the second half of your question, what did we find were the most frequent security measures that were missing from companies? I would use the acronym BEST, and that's something that we've been sort of bandying about internally quite a bit. It was a range of lacking backups, encryption, strong access controls, as well as the ability to maintain systems, track systems, and then upgrade them and maintain them in a timely way. And so if you're not BEST, then we did see a number of inadequate controls which ranged from not having proper firewalls or updated firewalls and VPNs to protect servers, accounts not being deleted and maintained after employees left, that was quite common, weak password hygiene, not having multi-factor authentication, and just not updating and upgrading software generally. We've also seen some instances of forgotten servers, neglected servers, which then become weak points. So what we do see is that the threat actors are very clever, they're very sophisticated, they are hunting for the weak points in an IT system of a company, or weak points in the IT system management of the company. And so just a flavor of what we're seeing. The rest of it you can find from our data breach report.
Sure. Thanks very much, Denise. Now, what I'd like to say is maybe just a slight interjection. just now, earlier on, just a reminder, you can ask questions. And what I will do is sometimes if I see questions are going to be relevant to what a panel is talking about, I will just post those questions. So if you do have questions, just put them in and we'll try and address them along the way. And I think there was a question about trends, which Denise has quite nicely spoken about. There is another question, and this I think goes nicely to Dave, about what I was going to ask you to lead with. What are common types of data breaches? And I think in your experience, so you have seen this not just as trends, but the actual cases you're dealing with, the clients you're helping. Perhaps you could speak in your experience. So what have you seen from
Sure. I
recently?
think, David, thanks for the question. The data breaches that we've seen over the years, I think, have been relatively standard across the board, right? Hackers are still human beings too. They still rely on the good old adage of exploiting the human, not the technology. And these threats that we have seen, I mean, apart of the common ones that Denise has mentioned about, things like ransomware, right? And often is being delivered by phishing emails and other sorts of tools. They are actually becoming increasingly complex, but deceptively simple, right? Because the hackers are using AI too. It's not just you, right? And we've noticed that in recent times, the increase in the breaches in our customers that we have, or organizations that call us to come in, take us as oftentimes we sell, let's say, for example, the fire extinguisher. This is the case where they say, please be the fire engine. And we noticed that a lot of breaches are now occurring due to hidden info stealers, a lot of third-party malicious tools masquerading as AI or productivity applications. And it's always been the same, regardless of technology, right? Hackers prefer to exploit the human. Now, to put a heading on this, just for you to remember this line, so for those in the crowd who are not keyboard guys like us, a very famous illusionist, Harry Houdini, once had this very famous quote, what the eye see, what the ears hear, the mind will automatically believe, right? And that's what exactly threat actors are actively manipulating today. And instead of attacking victims for passwords or your credentials, they are basically asking you to log into these new miracle AI tools, through phishing emails. So that's what we've been seeing of late. And if we take a step back to a couple of years ago, where the time-honed, train your staff on phishing emails, know how to spot phishing emails, we've arrived at a new time in this generation where hackers have more ease to access of tools. Yeah. And these include hijacking things like your MFA tokens, right? So just a simple thing, right? So if I put myself into the shoes of the hackers, they are becoming increasingly more deceptive, but they keep it simple. So 99% of the room here, if you have an iPhone and Android phone, you have a 6-digit password, right? 90% of you, that 6-digit password is also the password of your ATM card. But everybody talks only about passwords. Very recently, you had a data breach that was shared, I think, in Singapore media about a IT vendor, right, who's basically using a password with a P at operand $W0RD. It's the top 10 most used passwords in the world. So hackers are also, leveraging that platform and using the mentality of KISS, keep it simple, stupid, right? So they are adopting as fast as us and leveraging less on the technology and more onto the human.
Okay, that's really interesting. So I think, one of the takeaways in a way is as technology gets more and more complex, but the problem is not technology, right? We're not really trying to solve a purely technical issue. It is how do we get our colleagues, our employees, our staff to respond in the right way, right? Assuming they know what is the right way. So let me ask Wei Long, okay, in CAG, right? How do you view this? Threats, in a big company, threats are everywhere.
So I think, especially for this part, we use the acronym EAT here. So we do education, we have awareness campaigns, and we have trainings, right? So phishing exercises are things we do on a fairly regular basis, I would say at least monthly. But maybe sort of going on a different angle, but building on what Denise and Dave have also mentioned, as well as the earlier panel. I think now we are moving to a stage, because we've reached some level of maturity, where we recognize that, hey, actually, the breaches are not just coming from within, but actually through some of the tools, vendors, and services we depend on Dennis referred to some stats earlier, and I'm glad I prepared some separate stats. But a very popular report that I know many DPOs rely on is the Verizon Data Breach Report, which shows a doubling of data breaches being caused by third parties from 15 to 30% in the last year, and that's consistent with the Security Scorecard report showing 35% of breaches being caused by third parties. And I think that's actually a blind spot that maybe DPOs now need to focus a little bit more on. And I think the most sort of appalling stat that I looked at was that in Singapore, 71% of breaches are occasioned by third parties. So I think DPOs now need to treat third-party risk as part of our core data protection mandate and our role. And I think Denise mentioned earlier that the attackers are becoming so smart, and that really explains what we call the security bypass effect. We are focused on hardening our own systems. We've trained our employees. They're familiar with the phishing exercises, but the attackers know that as well, so they're trying to find the weakest point in the system, right? Because why sort of bang your head against the wall when you just find a weak spot or vulnerability in your entire supply chain? And that's how they might enter into our systems eventually. And so to me, that means that even if IT or some business lines own the vendor onboarding process, DPOs need to figure out a way to insert themselves into this. And I think I use a 4Ds kind of framework here, and keep me honest if that doesn't make sense. But that means for me at the start, doing a DPIA to assess necessity and to minimize data that's shared. Before you contract your vendors, make sure that you do some due diligence so that you know that they have sufficient capabilities. Once you've assessed that, enter into a data processing agreement with them so you obtain some assurances, promises, and obligations. And once that's done, it's not just all done because you have to do audits or you have to do some level of compliance declarations to make sure that they're actually keeping up to those promises that they've given to you. And I'll turn that back to you, David.
Sure, thanks very much. So it happens there is a question. Okay, so first of all, you talked about third party, and I see there are lots of questions about third party risk. So I will come back to that. But there is a question about phishing. And I think this is an interesting one. Despite repeated trading, phishing continues to be a successful attack vector. What alternative approaches beyond traditional awareness modules are being explored? So, of course, phishing is a way attackers use to get into your system, whether it's ransomware or other kinds of malware, right? I would say it's fairly common, right? It's very easy for people, because us being humans, we're not machines. We see something and we kind of think it's expected. We click on it, right? Of course, they've changed the name to match our company name. Everything looks good unless we dig a little bit more. So phishing tends to be very successful. And I'm not sure if there is a way to fully address phishing, but companies can do more to address the risk through other means. Perhaps could you share what else do you do, knowing that a phishing attack might be successful?
So I think I see it in two parts, right? So the phishing exercises definitely, and I think we are also evolving with the times. So I think we work closely with our cyber team to monitor the actual phishing emails that come in and try to develop our simulations based on those. That's one. And I think another, from a more technical perspective, what we do is have sort of IT systems or IT tools which actually scan for those emails, so you minimize the possibility or the opportunity for these emails to actually go to your employees. And I think finally, what we also do, and I think that's where simulations and awareness campaigns come in, is even after someone does click on a phishing email and they notice something that's wrong, they actually report it to their reporting officer, the DPO, or someone involved, so that the proper and relevant people and parties can get involved at an early stage.
Okay, thanks. That sounds, okay, I wouldn't give an opinion, but it sounds comprehensive, kind of, right? Obviously, you put in a lot of effort. There's been a lot of investment resources deployed. But CAG is a larger company. So let me now turn to Shannan, right? Obviously, a lot of SMEs, and incidentally, a lot of law firms are very small companies, but there are many SMEs. They form really the backbone of Singapore's economy. They provide all kinds of goods and services. They can't afford that kind of investment. They're not going to be putting in, huge networks and stuff like that. So what do you see, both as an SME yourself, as well as in terms of advising your SME clients, in terms of what kind of security should they be thinking about?
Okay, so I think I'll just run through a simple scenario. New user onboarding. What's the first thing that we give to our new user? Their password. How do you give that password to the new user? Is it on paper? Is it via email? Unencrypted? Plain text? Right. These are just the simple steps that I think SMEs can simply overcome in terms of trying to protect this first thing that the user gets when he or she joins the company. So things like using password managers. Right? So there are a lot of password managers out there. I think some of them are SME budget friendly. You can use those and think that would immediately reduce the significant risk of sharing passwords across internally within your organization or even externally. Right, so there are a lot of password managers out there that allows you to share passwords internally and externally. So this would be one simple step that we advise SMEs to take. Right, so that would be just the first step of onboarding your new staff. Right, then we move on to a lot of the other things, like how do you give access to systems to your new employees. So these are all the different practices that you should look at also, right? Especially for SMEs, because these are the plugs or the holes that you can plug immediately, easily, and without much budget. Right? So you don't need to spend too much on all these solutions. Once you've gotten over all these issues, then we can take a look at the bigger issues. Like what some of the panelists mentioned, email servers. Are you using good email servers? It's not easy to maintain an email server for SMEs. So what do? We put them on service providers' email servers. Which ones are the best? Right? So how do you determine which is the best, or at least within your budget, what could probably be the best? Right? So these are the little things that SMEs could do to try to do some data protection or even cybersecurity protection. I think these are the small steps that you could start with for SMEs especially, and do things one at a time. I know a lot of SMEs are restrained by budgets. We don't need to do everything at one go, but look at the ones that we could already do now, right? So like what I mentioned earlier. So I think those are the little steps that we should be doing for SMEs at least, and then work towards the bigger things like the servers, like files, how do you protect files and everything, encryption. So those are a bit more expensive solutions that you have to look at. Of course, there are always SME budget-friendly solutions out there. We just have to look out for it and then provide that solution to SMEs.
Okay, thanks very much. Now, that's a very interesting question, and I'm not going to exactly pose it, but it sets the context for what I'm going to ask. Here's the question. Given that a significant proportion of cyber breaches are attributable to human error, what strategies have proven effective in embedding a stronger culture of cyber awareness? So culture is a huge topic. We could have a panel just on culture and speak a lot about it. But this actually raises an issue, right? It's, as I mentioned, it's not just a technical solution we're looking for. It's not just constant reminders. We need to be able to have a system, have something in place that lets us adapt, lets our organization respond. In short, we need resilient organizations to be cyber resilient. So actually what I would like to ask first, and I don't know, maybe Denise could speak to this, is why do organizations need to be cyber resilient?
I think it almost answers itself given the sort of conversations that we've been having already. The organization, and we've heard it throughout the entire day, is increasingly digital. Everything that you have, everything you own, all your assets are in your servers, are in your computers. Those are the assets of the company. And yet it is humans that are operating these systems, managing these systems. Even your third-party outsourcing is another bunch of humans that are managing some of your outsourced functions. So cyber resilience is about understanding and knowing these processes, how to protect some of these systems, how to maintain some of these systems, and how to track some of these systems and the underlying data that is there. Cyber resilience is also being able to recover to respond when incidents happen, because we like to say that data breaches are not if but when. And so being able to quickly remediate, quickly save, quickly recover, but also quickly preserve whatever that you have, it becomes critical. So we see resilience in those two halves. Just a quick word on vendor supervision and third parties, because you mentioned that there are some questions there. We've seen a lot of these cases in recent times. And it comes to a point where it's not enough just to say, well, it's not my pasar, it's not my fault because I outsourced this function. And PDPC has always provided guidance and had principles around proper vendor supervision and proper vendor management. And that is the entire range of obligations and tasks, from picking the right vendor, asking the right questions, putting in place the right contractual arrangements to make sure that the vendor understands its responsibilities, to the extent that the vendor is a DI, a data intermediary, to make sure that they understand what their obligations are and are able to fulfill those obligations. But then on an ongoing basis, to ensure that you're properly supervising the vendor, auditing, asking the right questions, and making sure that the vendor understands what your systems are so that they can help maintain it properly. So, and then of course when incidents happen, to be able to recover from that. So I do think that there is a lot of ongoing vendor supervision and management obligations that you and us as DPO community has.
Yeah, I think you have actually answered one of the questions and highlighted this point. I think the question was basically that how do you impose obligations on vendors who have less resources than you? And I think the important point is it's not always saying the cheapest is the best, right? Especially if you're engaging a vendor who is handling data on your behalf or running some systems on your behalf, you do want them to have the appropriate level of security. And that's where due diligence and all those other things you mentioned comes in. So that's really good. That, of course, actually raises the question, right? So what are those measures that we need to put in place? And, of course, the technical people can tell you lots of things. But to many of us who are not technical, right, or even as DPOs, we don't have that technical background, we need to be able to understand what measures and controls are required. So one question I'd like to pose, and this could be answered by anyone, is, so how should companies look at this? I do want to have some framework in terms of what are the measures and controls I need to put in place, what are the sources I rely on, or what has been helpful for you, whether internally or if you've advised clients on this.
David, maybe I'll take this question. So in the vast range of customers that we've helped, I think there's something that has been the baseline for all of them, regardless of how technical or not they may be. IMDA has a specific self-assessment checklist, for example, right, for data protection essentials. You have other resources available by other agencies, like the Cybersecurity Agency of Singapore, the Cyber Essentials and Cyber Trust frameworks, that actually break down that whole entire life cycle for the company. So you may get in at certain ranges of these frameworks that are right fit for your organization, and they take a risk-based approach, right? So the same risk of an MNC might not be the same as an SME, and these are some of the baseline hygienic measures that you can take. Now, let's say you put yourself in the role of a DPO. That DPO may not be a technical person, but that's a place to start, right? That's actually a resource DPOs can actually use to begin asking questions within the organization. So to cite a story that will make it a little bit more memorable, so we've got two types of clients, one that have these frameworks, the others that only come in after the house burns down. Typically what the DPOs would do is, after having such a framework, and to add on further to Denise's points, when that organization comes up with the idea and says, hey, listen, I want to adopt AI, I already have this self-assessment framework with me. I know what are the basic due diligence steps I need to take. Now, naturally, these vendors that you're going to approach are also going to be SMEs. So some of those measures that they take is, have you done the self-assessment yourself? Right? It's a very baseline measured step. And it does not have to be, it must be IMDA's DP, it must be CSA's Cyber Essentials or Cyber Trust, but that at least is a tool that is publicly accessible to anyone. That comes at a good start point. And on the flip side, organizations that we serve, which are on the latter, very recently, actually this was about 2 weeks ago, an organization that called us in post-breach. We found out that they had, of course, the rush idea to create an AI tool, agentic AI, and they got on a vendor, no due diligence done, no framework to follow, no simple guidelines to follow, and proceeded to go to each department, HR, sales, and say, hey, listen, let me pick up this data, let me pick up data. And post-breach, we found out that it happened because they plugged all of these tools and API keys into third-party platforms, right, without knowing what those consequences are. So I think to answer that question, taking up the available checklist self-assessment sheets that are available globally here in Singapore spell out some very simple, basic due diligence tools. So one that I like to ask personally, if I have a concern about this and I employ a vendor to do something on my behalf, the first question I'm going to ask is, have you appointed a data protection officer? That's probably the first thing on point number 1 of the self-assessment sheet. And it sets the standard moving forward. So if that first question is no, you obviously know where number 2 to number 30 is going to be like, right? And if the DPO does not understand or may not know, does he have encryption in place? Those are then the questions that he can ask to other counterparts in the company or the vendors that they deal with. I think that's a good start.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, if I might jump on that, I see a lot of points which I'm really aligned with, and especially that last one. When we do a due diligence exercise on our vendors, I often tell my teams who ask me, hey, what happens if they reply no to some of the questions? And I say, actually, we have bigger problems if they say no to having a DPO because that's a requirement under the PDPA. So would you not be worried if we were to engage them to process some of our data? And they also talk about having a self-assessment and checklists. And I think that's where the value of certifications come. And earlier on in my career, I used to see certifications as really a checkbox exercise. But over time, I've actually seen how effective they can be. First of all, and Dave alluded to this, is that they're actually really useful for internal alignment. So David mentioned how there might be some things outside our sphere of sort of expertise. But when you embark on that certification process, it forces the teams in your organization to really confront some messy realities and answer some difficult questions, right? Does the business line actually know where our backups are? That's the B in the BEST framework. Who actually is the person who is going to push the button or push the trigger when we want to restore those backups? Do we need to engage a vendor for that? And how long might it take? Might it take 24 hours or 7 days or 7 weeks or 7 months? At least we know the answers to some of these questions. And switching gears a little bit, right? I think when DPOs push the question of having certifications, I think it helps us to flip the narrative. Privacy or legal might sometimes be seen as a cost center, but I think certifications help us shift the narrative to being builders of trust, building resilience, and maybe even developing a competitive advantage. I hope that consumers increasingly choose companies or organizations which have appropriate certifications, such as the Data Protection Trust Mark, and that's not just because CAG has the Trust Mark certification, but jokes aside, especially for organizations which offer B2B services, more companies procuring services and solutions now are asking, hey, do you have some sort of certifications that will make me feel more reliable and more trusting in the services that you provide? I know government services have now in some tenders include as requirements some of these certifications. So I think that's a really excellent way for DPOs to sort of prove differentiation. And I think finally, boards today are also increasingly asking, are we cyber ready? Are we privacy safe? How are we equipped to deal with a breach or breakdown in our services? Can we continue operating? And I think when we talk about certifications, they give a rubric or framework, and it allows DPOs to answer some of these questions not with sort of vague assurances, but with actual concrete auditable evidence. For example, the Trustmark certification used to have 81 requirements, and we say, hey, actually now at present, we're compliant with like 60 of those, and we have a plan over the next 3 to 6 months to come up to speed with the remaining 21 requirements. So I think that's how I see it.
Okay, so that's good to know. I mean, certifications are not just for the sake of getting them, but they have that framework, right, which we can rely on. Shannan, any thoughts about this?
I think as an SME myself, how I view the certifications, of course, firstly, when we applied for the DPE and CE, we are IT vendors. So like what Dave and the rest said, I have to make sure I myself, pass all the checklists. I'm certified. I can prove to my clients, okay, look, I'm certified. I'm a data intermediary for all my clients, right? So that's a big worry for me and obviously for the client. But internally, I think most SMEs are very operational. We always focus on operations, and in terms of data protection, it's the same. I would think, how do I protect my data? How do I make sure it's encrypted? How do I make sure that my passwords are exchanged safely? But after taking the certifications, we started looking at policy level. Because if there's no policy to us, whatever we practice is not repeatable. We cannot keep repeating success in terms of data protection if there is no policy internally. I have to make sure there's a policy of how to share passwords. I have to have an internal policy of how do I store files securely? How do I share files securely? These are all internal policies, I think, for SMEs that sometimes it's very operational. We just pass it by and just do it. But if there is no policy there, then the internal employees might not follow it day to day. That's the most important thing, I think, for SMEs, because we are very operational. So that kinds of level up of how we think and how we implement data protection internally as SMEs.
Okay, so I think, so this is an important point, and when you talk about certification, sometimes, you may wonder what does it actually mean, but it's good to know whether you're a large company or an SME. The important point really is that you have this framework you can look at, even if you are not 100% there, right? It gives you at least information, a basic roadmap, what you can build on. Obviously, different companies, you have different things which are going to be critical to you. So if you're dealing with lots of data, maybe it's going to be more pressing if you're consumer-facing. But certainly for any company that has data, both the cyber or the data protection certifications are going to be useful. And I think just to mention, obviously, it's kind of alluded to, there are different levels of certification, right? So if you're a smaller company, you can go for the more basic one first, right? So that's something to look at. I would like to throw in a couple of questions before we tackle the last topic on DPOs. And I think I'll turn back first to the data intermediary question. So we had a few around that. And one of it is this, right? I'll just pose this question. If your data intermediary cannot tell you what is the affected personal data, right? How can you assess it comprehensively as a data controller? So I take it this question, if you're a data controller, you engage a data intermediary, there's a data breach at the data intermediary, right? How should you be looking at these kinds of incidents? Anyone? This, by the way, is our most popular question.
Okay,
so I have to pose
maybe I take this because unfortunately got too much experience in this. Sometimes that answer is actually pretty murky. It depends which side of the pond you come from. If you're a larger company and you're a data controller, you get a DI to come in, there will already be some form of thresholds put in place, right? So what exact information am I sharing with you? To cite more in your place example, this event here today is basically, I think, being run by people who have gone through these certification pathways. So I've seen what the government has asked them, because they are now the data intermediaries. So they basically ask, okay, this information that are basically being passed on, where do you keep them in the first place? So if I'm the data controller, I set the standard of what information the DI should receive. That's the ideal example here. So it limits the risk. But often and not, in reality, in the SME sector, it is, I'm the data controller, you're my intermediary. You know what? Here's the key. Take everything. Now, when someone comes in to then find out what's going on, what is the damage, what's the impact, often and not, it is probably too big in proportion to count, right? And sometimes I think as dealing with regulators before, like in PDPC and investigators, if you can't determine what is that minute amount that has been affected, you take the worst case scenario, means you have everything in place, right? And I feel that as long as companies don't have that mindset of, okay, I don't need to give you everything to process my information, or basically for my clients as a DI, they should limit what they send. Because often than not, that is the reason why post-breach they call people like us. And we try to sense make as much as we can. And often and not, for the bigger breaches, which are a bit more technical in nature, people like us also get a bit more fidelity in what we are able to find out. But when it's a hit and spray kind of thing, sometimes when you come to these organizations, the data intermediary themselves do not have logging mechanisms. Even God can't help you, right? There's very few things that you can determine. So you would take a risk-based approach, and if you can't determine what that number is, you take what's the whole entire sample size. Right.
Okay, so that I think it's a very specific question, but it was very popular, so I have to ask it. There is another very popular question, and I don't want Denise to answer this first. I would like somebody else to answer this first. And it's important because to me it highlights something about the cost of a data breach. So the question is, it's cheaper to pay the fine for a breach than to secure the platform. How can we address this mindset? So, so my first thing is, and I kind of know the answer to this, is it really cheaper to pay the fine? What is the true cost of a data breach? And I don't want Denise to answer this first. Anyone else? Of course, you don't have to speak from experience. I'm not asking you to, right? But if you have thoughts on this or you've seen this before, any comments on what is the cost of a data breach? It's not just a fine. Anyone?
Yep, maybe I can start first. And yeah, no, I think David alluded to it already. And yeah, when we look at all these cost of data breach reports, and the Verizon one is a very popular one for that, I think you have to consider all the other aspects as well, right? So when you consider, and lawyers like to talk about time cost, and when you consider the time cost of all the people being involved, when you divert your IT teams away from their day jobs to investigate the incident. So the question earlier talked about how do we even assess whether what sort of data is being affected. Maybe 3 people spend 3 days looking into that. And then I think the other big piece is the reputational one, right? I think Facebook and Meta is a very famous one for this because after Cambridge Analytica, maybe it lives on till this day where people say, hey, do we actually and can we actually trust Facebook with our data? For many, it's still a yes because they have billions of people still using their platform. But for some other organizations, if reputation is truly important to you, then I think that really increases the cost that's being involved apart from just that financial penalty. Because that's the case even for the largest tech companies in the world. They're hit with $1 billion fine, but what does that compare with their overall revenues? So that's how I would look at it.
Sure. We don't have too much time, so I won't ask Dave and Shannan, but obviously another cost is when you're responding to a data breach, everything else is more expensive. Cost of recovery, you need consultants, you need lawyers, cybersecurity consultants, forensic. If I need to replace a server on short notice, that's going to be more expensive. So everything else is expensive as well. But Denise, do you have a perspective on this? I don't think we're asking for higher fines.
You're not asking for higher fines, I just wanted to clarify.
So.
I do have a perspective, and I agree entirely with Wei Long that actually, and I understand, in your day-to-day business, whether you're small, medium, or even large enterprise, there are other pressing sort of revenue, profit concerns. This is seen as a cost center, something that I can put off for another day. But once the breach happens, the cost of business disruption, the cost of replacement, the cost of investigation, we do see companies, big and small, who have been breached, having to call in very expensive forensic investigators and other companies to do the recovery and to do the forensic investigation. And by then, it's a little bit too late. I would say that overall, our enforcement philosophy is not sort of very stark or binary. We are asking ourselves always, what was reasonable in the circumstances, given the company's resources, given the type, the volume, and the sensitivity of the data that they are holding to have put in place. We are looking for an attitude of accountability, of responsibility, of understanding, and of due diligence. And if looking at all those factors in play, then we look at the appropriate directions or penalties or enforcement actions to take. So it's always a calibrated balance for us, bearing in mind that companies need to do business, but they need to do business keeping the data that they have protected and safe. So is the cost high in a data breach? The answer is yes, and I think it's actually much higher than just putting in place some of these reasonable protective measures. And more importantly, the DPOs helping to instill a culture of accountability up and down the leadership chain.
Okay, thank you. Now, we're running out of time, but I think there's one other topic we kind of talked about, but this one maybe I won't open. Any one or two people who's interested, panelists who are interested to answer, about the role of a DPO in a data breach. How do you think, why do I need the DPO involved? There are multiple stakeholders. What are perhaps the most important key tasks of a DPO in a data breach scenario?
My take in 10 seconds is the DPOs are the ones in the room here today. They're the ones who understand their role and responsibility and how important this is. And I think the DPO plays a critical role in conveying that to the CIO, to the CEO, to the COO, who obviously has a broader matrix of factors to consider. But this becoming such a critical business factor, the DPO can help bridge that conversation.
Yeah. Same, to sum it up for me, I mean, the DPO is basically the pathfinder and the compass for the rest of the soldiers to follow, right? Because when the breach happens, you're going to be asked 1,000 questions yesterday, right? So the DPO is the one that probably points the guiding light and says that, okay, this is what we need first, this is next, here we move on, so that the company basically can operate in as efficient as it can.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. So really, I think this adds to the DPO. I think those who have DPOs for a while, and it's already been alluded to, there are many hats you wear. You're not intended to be a cybersecurity expert, but you need to know enough to bridge the cyber people with your IT, with your user departments, maybe even with your legal team, right? So you have to have enough understanding to be able to do that. There's one last question, but this is really for Denise. And I think it's nice to end on this because it is an interesting one. And this question highlights that in Europe, of course, there's enforcement of many different areas. They are looking at biometric, large tech companies, which is a particular concern in Europe. And the question is, does PDPC see any evolution in its areas of enforcement in the coming future? So I don't know if you have any thoughts you can share with us. How does PDPC see? You've looked at this space for a while. I know there's a recent report, what you've seen in the past, but how might that affect your enforcement activities coming up?
I'll answer the question, maybe stepping away from enforcement just for a minute. I think as a policy, and this is wearing my data policy hat, we see increasing use of biometrics. We see increasing in both retail and security applications. We do see increased use of data in a variety of applications, in everyday, in AI. And we are aware of this. We are trying to actively look at our guidance and actively work with sectors who have guidance in these areas to be a lot more specific and helpful to companies about what we think is best practice, what we think good looks like. And Minister referred to this as well. Then if I zoom back into the question, which is on enforcement action, we hope to get Singapore to a stage where all of us know what good looks like, and all of us are aiming towards that standard. Again, my enforcement approach and that of my office has been about what is reasonable in the circumstances. We know that threat actors are evolving themselves and being more sophisticated all the time. But what can you do in your position, your company's position, to kind of address that and deal with that? That's always the lens that we take, whichever the problem set is being presented to us. I guess, on a more positive note, we always want to work with industry, be it in sandboxes or otherwise, to experiment with technologies such as privacy-enhancing technologies, which will de-identify some of the sensitive information and still allow companies to extract insights to do the work that they do. So we do think that technology does help to mitigate some of these issues, and that will help deal with some of the downstream issues and concerns and problems later on.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, I'd like to thank all of you as well. We still have a lot of questions we haven't answered. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, and I do not want to keep you from your lunch. So please do join me in thanking the panel, and we wish you a very good day ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, and to our panelists.